Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club.
Theme music. All right. So we are all the way up to July of 1966. And it does seem like it's been a rather long journey since we began this whole thing here. Today and next episode, we will be talking about the end of an era.
Yes. So far, we've had these two amazing Marvel pencilers who were also doing a lot of writing, Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby. And now we are going down to one. This episode and next will be Steve Ditko's final issues of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, which will be tragic. Much more tragic for Doctor Strange than for Spider-Man, because...
Oh, good God, yes. It does not transition well.
Spider-Man transitions much better than Doctor Strange does. Going to be many years before Doctor Strange gets back up to the quality of Ditko, if it ever does. And Spider-Man recovers quite nicely right away.
Many argue that it really surpasses Ditko's work relatively quickly. That is a controversial statement, but it is a statement that people will argue a lot.
I would disagree with that. My favorite Spider-Man issues are the Ditko Spider-Man issues, but I love Romita Spider-Man. So we've got lots of good Spider-Man goodness to talk about starting 2 episodes from now. But First, let's go ahead and do these episodes and do our farewell to Steve Ditko.
Yes, indeed. Could you tell me about this cover?
Yes. Well, there is no cover. Nobody drew a cover for this issue. I should know more if I'm going to be hosting this podcast about how it all went down, or what we can know about what it all went down, because Steve Ditko didn't talk and Stan talked too much. And it is hard to get the real story about how it all went down. But somehow Ditko ended up leaving Spider-Man and Doctor Strange without covers. Both Spider-Man and Doctor Strange in Strange Tales this month, they cut and paste covers together from the interior art of the book. We have a big picture of Spider-Man punching his way towards us, and then we have 3 little insert panels, I don't know what I'm saying, of Spider-Man fighting various goons. And this is all art from the inside of the book. It says, just a guy named Joe. Here Spidey is fighting pests. Just wait till you see the offbeat supervillain starring in this ish. He's the prize pussycat of the year. Thrills, spills, chills. Enough said.
This cover is okay. This one, I wouldn't necessarily look at this and say, oh, what's going on here? But when we get to Doctor Strange, it really does. Like, oh my God, what am I looking at? All right. So, yes. Let's go ahead and get on into the inside.
So, interestingly enough, no cover art and also no splash page on the inside. The Ditko is too busy cramming stuff into this last issue. We begin with a 4-panel page and never do get any splash pages in the issue. Written and edited by Stan Lee, plotted and drawn by Steve Ditko. Nice to give him... Stan has been inconsistent in giving Steve his plotting credit, but he gives it to him on this last issue. Lettered, unfettered by Artie Simek. So we have this guy, Joe Smith, this sort of down on his like boxer guy. And I think I like this character a lot. He's a character with a lot of character to him. He's a character with a lot of heart to him. I really feel for him. He wants to make it his boxer. He can't. We see him get punched out in the ring. We then see that eventually he's got a manager who sticks by him through thick and thin, which is a really well portrayed relationship in this issue. He then gets a job on a monster movie. So my biggest complaint about this issue is that if he's in a monster movie, why is he wearing a sci-fi getup? And he should be wearing a monster outfit. And I think he'd be a much better character, this guy named Joe. I think that if he was wearing a scary monster outfit and then went berserk and started attacking the city, that would be more interesting than someone in a sort of generic sci-fi hero costume going berserk and attacking the city.
Well, on page 2, panel 5, the director refers to him as an alien monster. So presumably he is a monster, presumably either he looks monstrous inside the armor, or the way I really took it is he is this engine of destruction that came from the stars, and we don't really, he's not human, so they're just referring to him as a monster. But yeah. I definitely see what you mean.
It would have been fun to give him a monster outfit.
Yep.
We then get to the laziest form of superhero or supervillain origin, which is just chemicals plus electricity. that is like, if you don't want to put a lot of work into coming up with a superhero origin or a superpower origin, you just have a puddle of chemicals that gets hit by a spark of electricity and gives somebody superpowers.
Yeah, so what? That's the Flash and wasn't Electro the same thing? And
Basically,
yeah, this is a pretty generic origin.
he gets superpowers. Meanwhile, we cut back to Peter Parker visiting the Daily Bugle. We see Jonah's latest secretary is also quitting in disgust. She can't stand to work for him. Only Betty Brant can, which JJJ points out to Peter Parker, like, you're the one who drove away my previous secretary, the only one who could put up with me. Then Peter runs away from him and runs into Ned Leeds. Well, Peter thought that Betty had eloped and run away with Ned Leeds. Well, it turns out Ned Leeds is looking for her too. And Peter's like, oh, okay, where is she? My God, I hope she's okay. And Ned is pissed at Peter. He's like, I thought she ran away with you. They're not getting along. Meanwhile, we have Joe Smith. Also, I wish he had a monster name. I wish, he had been the Berserker or something like that. But he's just a guy named Joe. You can tell he's dizzy because he's got little sparkles all around his head, and he is running amok, runs into Peter Parker. Peter Parker changes into Spider-Man. They have a big fight. We can see some of the panels that got snipped for the cover.
And really, a lot of this art is not up to snuff for what we usually get from Ditko. It really looks like either he just had senioritis and was mailing some of this artwork in, at least in the inking phase, or somebody else had to do some of the inking because he had quit in the middle.
I don't mind this art. I like this art. I like page 7.
They just look sort of stiff and kind of generic.
I don't know. The villain's in a daze. He's not very dynamic. You can tell he's got little daze sparkles. So then the big question, the huge question remains on these final issues of Ditko Spider-Man. Did he intend Norman Osborn to be the Green Goblin or not? This next thing that happens sort of implies that maybe he wasn't supposed to be the Green Goblin, because Norman Osborn decides to hire some goons to go attack Spider-Man, and he wants to put on a disguise to do it. Well, his disguise is a little fake mustache and goatee. And you would think if Norman Osborn wants to interact with the underworld and put on a disguise, he would put on the Green Goblin disguise, which is what he has done in the past, instead of a mustache and goatee, but he goes ahead and hires them. Meanwhile, we get one of the most infamous Spider-Man pages of all time. And the one reason people say maybe it was good that Ditko left the book. I disagree that it was good that Ditko left the book, but I can see that he was allowing his politics to infect the book in a way that was out of character for Peter Parker. We get a page that is quite infamous for being totally out of character, and a page that would be very much contradicted by future events. We have Peter Parker on the campus of Empire State University, and suddenly we see a bunch of students that are holding protest signs. We can't see what it says on the protest signs, because if it was civil rights, it would look really bad, or if who knows what they're protesting about. But they try to rope Peter Parker into this, and he is having none of it. He is sort of disgusted by them. You can see this in the art. And then Stan Lee went ahead and fulfilled what the art is doing in the scripting, even though this really, we know that Stan Lee was quite a liberal and would let his own politics dominate this book very shortly once Steve Ditko was off. But at this point, Ditko was doing solo plotting. And we have the protesters going, hey, Parker, not so fast. We could use another man to carry a sign. Come on, join in the protest march. Peter Parker says, not me. I haven't got time. Besides, I've got nothing to protest about. Says, what? Nothing to protest about? What are you, some kind of religious fanatic or something? What's the matter with you? Aren't you interested in saving the world? Anyway, it's an excuse to cut classes and maybe get your picture in Newsweek. So this is sort of this interesting thing of like, that the mainstream media was unfairly magnifying a few malcontent protesters, this sort of idea here. And then Flash Thompson's like, say, look who's over there with the marchers. And Harry Osborn says, it's that lightweight Peter Parker. Wouldn't you know it? This is a terrible thing to do. And but then Gwen, defending Peter, says, he's not with them. Look, he's leaving. So he's not a terrible protester type person. We then get a real caricature of a female protester saying, come on, Parker, if you join our protest meeting, we'll join yours sometime. Someone says, sure, and if you've got nothing to protest, don't worry about it. That won't stop us. He says, forget about it. They go, your cousin likes Lawrence Welk. Go back to Squaresville, you rosy-cheeked reactionary. He says, I'd better cut out before I give them something to protest about. So this is the only page in all of Spider-Man history in which he seems like a right-winger, in which he seems like someone who is, God knows what these people are protesting about, but there were a lot of great things that people were protesting about in 1966, most obviously opposition to the Vietnam War, but also, civil rights, gay rights, women's rights. There were a lot of things about America that needed fixing, and, campus political protest was on the vanguard of that, and very soon we would have Peter Parker showing a different attitude towards college protesters. This is the one time we see him like this, and it is the biggest argument for that this book was no longer a good fit for Ditko. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, just as somebody who majored in history, let me just point out that I'm definitely sure that the gay rights movement had not really begun yet, and I'm not sure at what stage the women's lib movement was at this point. But so I just wanted to bring that up with your listing of all the things that could be protested. As I've said many times before on this podcast, I try to avoid us talking about political issues in ways that would alienate some of our listeners who might be of political persuasions that might be different from ours, because this is supposed to be an oasis from that. But at the same time, you can't avoid it here. Right? Yeah. So, this could be a free speech protest or an anti-Vietnam protest or any number of other things. I think that Stan was put in a very difficult spot here because he knew that a lot of the momentum that Marvel had built up over the past 5 years had been on college campuses. These were no longer books for pre-adolescents or, early adolescents necessarily. That those were still, probably the majority of the readers, but they were getting this cultural cachet largely through basically the group that's being denigrated here. I really get the feeling reading this that Stan significantly downplayed the seriousness of what's going on here, made them look silly and frivolous rather than un-American commies or something like that. Like, I'm wondering if Steve Ditko was doing here. So I really feel that Stan was cushioning the blow of what's going on here, both for self-preservation and also because this probably did not align much with his politics. Although, once again, according to the book Strange and Stranger, The Worlds of Steve Ditko, Stan Lee is the one who gave Steve Ditko his first Ayn Rand book right around the time that Spider-Man began. And we've talked about Stan's evolution, that he seems to have gone from standard, sort of not that political, but I'm really afraid of the commies winning the Cold War, which isn't entirely unreasonable. But then after the Cuban Missile Crisis seems to have evolved into this antagonism and Cold War thing is really just a danger to all of humanity, and we probably need to cut it out. And then he was continuing along that trajectory. And so this seems to violate both where he was personally drifting, even if he had been more either sympathetic to objectivism or at least not objecting to it enough not to like Ayn Rand's writing style. You also have to wonder if Steve Ditko had decided he was quitting here anyway and decided he just needed to go ahead and get his say out there on the way out the door.
Yeah, that is an interesting supposition, an interesting proposition, because interestingly enough, in this month's Doctor Strange, Ditko does a huge farewell to the book. He is doing a massive climax of every storyline he has done and leaves the book with a big, that's it, folks. This is the big climax to all of Ditko's Doctor Strange storylines. So he certainly seemed to know that he was leaving. There is very little indication here in this issue that Steve Ditko is leaving. And one almost gets the impression that he didn't know that he was leaving, but because there is no attempt made to wrap up any storylines. But yeah, it's interesting. Is this the one thing he does where it's like, I'm leaving, guys, so let me go ahead and give a leaving FU to protesters? I don't know.
Right. It's like the I'm quitting and I'm going to tell the boss what I really think of him on my way out the door, because what is he going to do? Fire me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows? Once again, all we can do is speculate based on what little information we can get from Stan, who is an unreliable narrator, and Steve Ditko, who didn't talk about it much. And when he did write about it, generally it was many decades later.
Yeah. Anyway, so we should move on. So then everyone who is being paid by Norman Osborn to go out and kill Spider-Man is getting ready to go out and attack him. We have, once again, Ditko gets to draw his final panel of Peter Parker holding a test tube while everybody is yelling at him over his shoulder, which has been one of the classic panels in this book. Spider-Man goes out in town, starts getting attacked by all these goons. Meanwhile, Joe is falling into his days again, has the little sparkles again, and decides to go back out on a rampage. We see the same picture that is on the cover of Spider-Man swinging his fist at us.
When Joe comes back into the boxing gym, the caption at the top says, "And at that exact, precise, self-same split second, parentheses, not that it would have really made any difference if it was a bit earlier or later, close parentheses, a strangely garbed figure enters a crowded gym." And I have often talked about Stan Lee's penchant for saying, at precisely that same moment or exactly 30 seconds later. And I am always thinking exactly what is in these parentheses every time, and it's nice to see Lee acknowledge that. That's gratifying to me, if nothing else.
Yes, he is engaging in some self-parody there. Joe shows up at his boxing gym and gets in a fight with them. Spider-Man eventually makes it down there. He gets in a big fight with Joe. We have, once again, a whole page of just sound effects, with is Stan Lee buying himself some time, not having to do as many speech balloons. And then Joe finally snaps out of it, ends up not getting in any trouble for various reasons. And Spider-Man eventually goes out with the goons, sees a little boxing dummy that looks like Ned Leeds and tries to punch it out. But we get our final glimpse of Mary Jane, once again, her head covered by a shrubbery, and she is saying that she was hanging out hoping to meet Peter again and didn't get a chance to. And then we get...
And we do see that she is quite buxom, among other things. Yes.
So then Peter returns home, sees on the news that Joe Smith, the boxer, has gotten a 5-year movie star contract. And this depresses Peter to no end, even though he seemed somewhat glad for him before. As Steve Ditko's farewell to the book, Aunt May says, "I'm glad you turned off the TV. Some of those news items can give a body nightmares." And Peter slumps up the stairs, saying, "Not much chance of that in my case. I only have them when I'm awake." And then that's it. The end of Steve Ditko on this book, the end of the co-creator and solo plotter and penciler and inker for the last half year of this book is gone.
I think this is his farewell to the book. I mean, the story overall doesn't really seem to be, a big wrap up like he does in Doctor Strange. But I mean, look at that last panel. It's like, what? This has all just been. Honestly, this stuff all just isn't worth it, and I'm walking away now.
Yeah, it's a very different ending than we get in Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange ends far more triumphantly. I have no idea if
none of us
Ditko penciled and inked this page, knowing it would be his last page ever of Spider-Man. Even when he returns to Marvel, he assiduously makes sure that he never pencils or inks Spider-Man again as a character. And I don't know if he knew that this was his farewell to this wonderful contribution to American literature he had made.
Well, the fact that they had to cobble a cover together sort of says to me that towards the end, he was probably, if not committed to leaving, then at least certainly thinking about it by the time he got to this point.
It's funny, because when you hear about comics history from this time, they're always like, oh, the covers were done first and then the books were done because the coloring process was more complex on the covers and they needed more time. But in this case, it was clearly a case where he seemingly quit between doing the inside and doing the covers. So they were seemingly doing the covers after the insides at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. That's something that I'm not as familiar with, what the process was in terms of covers versus insides back in the day.
Anyway, that's this issue. It's a real shame to lose him, but we've got a great new artist coming on next issue, and Stan coming back on potting, or at least co-potting on the book next issue, and things take a decided change in a new direction with finally putting some names with some faces. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and, in the end, this is going to be more or less the best case scenario for a long-time co-creator with a very distinctive style and vision leaving a book. Like, this is about the best case scenario you can come up with for that situation. Which,
You mean in terms of having a great successor?
Yes. I'm sorry. That's what I meant in terms of what's going to happen when this guy walks out the door. And Spider-Man was in the hands of somebody who certainly took the character to much greater heights of commercial success. Various people can argue about whether it was superior artistic success. That's an argument I am not wanting to get into right now.
My last thought for the Spider-Man issue is, what do you think it would have been like if he had decided to do the same thing in Spider-Man he did in Doctor Strange, and this issue had been a huge finale of everything that was going on in the book? I mean, what would that have looked like? I guess that we would have had to find out what was going on with Betty Brant and presumably send Betty Brant off to marry Ned Leeds. We would have had to definitely find out what was going on with Norman Osborn, maybe get Peter Parker together with Gwen Stacy, reveal Mary Jane. It would have been fascinating if Ditko had said, this is my big finale to Spider-Man. Let's go ahead and wrap everything up.
I don't know. It just seems impossible. Like, it just seems like there's no way it could have been pulled off well. So I'm glad he didn't try.
Yeah, I am too. Okay.
Alrighty. So let's go ahead and talk about Daredevil. Daredevil number 18, The Man Without Fear, There Shall Come a Gladiator. On the cover, we see a very, very foggy night at the docks, something that actually looks like something that would be Steve Ditko's specialty here.
Yes, and Steve Ditko likes fogs and he likes docks.
Yes, and Daredevil seems to be struggling against a villain who actually, his helmet looks kind of like Joe's in some ways. But he is vaguely Gladiator-like, and we will talk more about his costume as we go on. So we begin. Foggy Nelson is walking into a costume shop, and he has been sort of doing this kind of subtle, I might be Daredevil. No, I'm not, because I wouldn't tell you, but I might be Daredevil thing, because he thinks that Karen will love him if he is an exciting person like that. So he is now going ahead and committing to this ruse. Credits are story by Smilin' Stan Lee, art by Jazzy Johnny Romita. Is this the first time he's been referred to as Jazzy?
I don't know.
Inks by Fearless Frank Giacoya, so he's getting credit under his own name these days, and lettering by Swingin' Sammy Rosen.
Yes. So Foggy is thinking on the first page, Karen is about 99% convinced I'm really Daredevil, but she still hasn't said she'll marry me. So I've got to convince her 100%, and this is the place to do it. Like, I don't know if you know how marriage works, but generally thinking that someone is lying to you all the time is not the number one prerequisite for marriage. Like, it's like, oh, Foggy, just tell me that you're lying to me all the time, then I'll marry you.
Oh, Matt, don't bring your, 2024 idea of relationships back to 1966. I mean, I'm sure that was just de rigueur for the day.
Then you got an oxen bride price from her father, I guess.
So I love the detail that Romita and Giacoya put into this dark, cluttered, but very well-made costume shop. Just all sorts of little details in here. Oh, and there is a note that says that Stan Lee left on vacation, and I think there's another issue this month that then says that Stan Lee couldn't script it because of a vacation. So he says that Stan wrote only the first 7 pages, and then give a cheer for Dandy Denny O'Neil, who bravely scripted the balance of this ever-loving epic. So, Again, we talked about the importance of Denny O'Neil in comics in general. The other day, we talked about how he isn't usually associated with mystic characters and things like that. No, he is associated with characters like Daredevil, whom he wrote and or edited for many years during his most notable periods in the 1980s.
Yes.
This is interesting for him to have this brief association. Foggy doesn't see anyone working there. He's about to walk out, even though these are probably the most amazing costumes I've ever seen in a costume shop. But then Melvin Potter comes out, looking like a bad guy. Heavy brow, weird-looking mustache, bald.
Essentially, later, Frank Miller will redeem this character and will still have him looking kind of like this, but nicer. A sort of tamed-down version of his evil-looking face here. Now, it's only right now I'm reading any pre-Miller Daredevil comics. And when I was reading the Miller Daredevil comics in the 80s, I always assumed that they had had him open a costume shop as part of his rehabilitation now that he was no
Yes.
longer a villain. It's only now that I'm going back reading these issues, I'm like, oh, he always had a costume shop. And it was an evil costume shop. And
Then he turns it into a good costume
then he
shop.
turns it into a good costume shop.
Yes, and I just had an exchange with somebody on Facebook just today about, later in the Daredevil TV show, Melvin Potter is a character there who makes Daredevil's first actual Daredevil-looking costume. And in the background, I had seen people point out that there was a set of Stiltman legs sitting back there. But what I had not noticed, two other details, there is a poster for an actual movie, but this is a poster that never existed for that actual movie, called like Vengeance of the Gladiators or something like that. That is a ripoff, or an homage to the cover of that Gladiator issue where David Mazzucchelli drew the cover. And also, there's some saw blades in there that are both a reference to Melvin Potter's evil costume in a little bit here with his razor discs, and also a reference to Stiltman in that they are made by Caxton Industries.
Yes.
And that's a detail I have never noticed before. Okay, to get back to what we're doing here, Matt Murdock is worried about Foggy, worried he's going to get himself hurt. But he takes his mind off it by exercising in his gym. He goes to the office and feels that he has to pretend that he can't tell if anyone's in the room when Foggy and Karen had been talking right before he came in. It's like, dude, you're overshooting the mark here. This is not. So anyway, Foggy had talked Potter into making the costume. Melvin is upset to see him, but is able to give him the Daredevil costume. And then they've got an arrangement where Potter is going to show up in a supervillain suit and pretend to attack Foggy, and he will turn into Daredevil and fight him off and prove to Karen that he is Daredevil. We see Foggy trying on his costume, and once again, we go back and forth about his physical form, and I wouldn't describe him as fat. I mean, he's TV fat, right?
Yeah.
But he is, that's just a normal guy who doesn't work out much.
Dad bod.
Well, probably one step less than Dad bod, but yes, still. Daredevil is now trailing Foggy to make sure that he doesn't get in trouble because he's sure that he is going to get in trouble. We have one of those ridiculous things where Daredevil hooks onto a helicopter that just happens to be going in the right direction that he needs to go and will be able to help him follow the cab. And it, of course, drops him off right on top of a building that he is able to jump onto that is right near where the taxi cab is going to be. And this is one of those things that would not have jumped out at me when I was a kid, when Daredevil jumps on top of the cab to then follow them. And, the cabbie does recognize something happened. He just says, "Did you hear something on the roof?" I guess I'm just imagining things. If a human body fell on the roof of your car while you were in it, you would notice. So Potter, it becomes clear that if it wasn't already clear, that he is taking this opportunity to turn himself into a supervillain. Similar to the unnamed character who took over the Thing's persona in the previous month. Similar to him, Potter is somebody who just thinks that, these people with costumes, the costume is all that makes these people looked up to and or feared. There's nothing good about them in any way, so I can play at the same game here. And he's talking about his arsenal that is part of his costume as he's putting it on, including sharp spikes on his boots, like on the calves. And he specifically says that they're razor sharp. It's like, dude, lots of these things are just not good ideas.
And not very Gladiator-esque. So I like this outfit, okay? I love the idea of the spinning saw blades on the wrists. I think that that's a very cool looking thing. Later, they'll give that to Whirlwind, where I think it makes sense when he's spinning around. But I do think Gladiator worked better as character when he was redeemed and he was a better guy. But Yeah, one of my big problems with Gladiator is that his costume doesn't look very Gladiator-esque. Certainly, Gladiators did not have whirling saw blades on their hands. As you pointed out, he will later come back in an O'Neill Mazzucchelli issue where he looks more like a Gladiator. That makes more sense. But then you have, ridiculously, I think this, I don't know, I haven't read these Daredevil issues, but I think this may be the only time he could use his whirling saw blades to fly, which is silly and is not something that gladiators do. He also can use his helmet to breathe underwater, which is silly and not something that gladiators do. As with so many Marvel villains of the 1960s, I wish he were more thematically consistent.
Well, yeah, he refers to these things as wrist shields, but they clearly are spinning and look like, oh, and they're making sound effects. Zrrr. Anyway, one way or the other, yeah, he's a bit of a mess, but I like the look of him. I like his chainmail pants, among other things, and his chest plate. The wrist buzzsaws do just seem like you are going to cut off your hand. Like you're going to bend your hand backwards, and the hand and the blade will both come off. But, you know, this is comics. Yes. So Daredevil sees that the cab is pulling over onto this foggy area at the docks, which just looks really sketchy. And Daredevil's like, oh no, he's really going about this. This is not going to be good. Gladiator comes out and challenges him. We've got the thing of Foggy being like, what do I do with my suit when I'm changing into my Daredevil costume? Like, this is an expensive suit. I can't afford to just, why didn't I think about this stuff?
It was a lot of fun. Stanley is sort of, or I guess maybe Denny O'Neill at this point, is taking this opportunity to sort of poke fun at the entire idea of superhero-dom. And, you know, he's like, okay, we can finally admit how ridiculous it is being a superhero in all these various ways now that we've got Foggy trying it. And we're like, okay, this is our chance to talk about the things we normally very much do not talk about in Marvel Comics. Like, what do they do with their street clothes?
Well, two quick things about that. One is that my understanding is Denny O'Neill never had any intention of writing superhero books, despite how important he ended up becoming to the genre over his lifetime, that this was not something he intended to fall into. So I think he had a little bit of contempt for some of these things. The other thing is that in the Joe Orlando issues of Daredevil, Joe Orlando was putting way too much thought into what was going to happen to his clothes when he changed. And so this might be considered sort of a reference to that. Who knows? So Daredevil is going in to, you know, have this fake fight with Gladiator. It becomes very quickly clear this is not a fake fight. Karen runs off in fear. We have that panel on page 14 that you were talking about where it appears as though Gladiator can fly as part of what those spinning discs do. As he's going, Daredevil then drops on him from one of the crates. And
the real Daredevil.
Right, the real Daredevil, and Gladiator is not aware that he is now swapped out from Foggy. So it was that Foggy didn't think he was fighting a real supervillain, but then he was. Now the supervillain doesn't think he's fighting the real Daredevil, but he actually is.
Which is fun.
Yeah, it is fun. And the what do I do with my suit bit is very entertaining. This is an entertaining issue. I mean, and very well drawn. So yeah, there's the whole thing with the breathing underwater when he pulls Daredevil underwater. Well, we've got more of the battle, and it is a very nice photogenic battle. Daredevil eventually jumps off, and then Foggy, who had lost consciousness, regains consciousness. And he's like, wait, what happened? Did I do that? Like, what's going on? And the police who show up are like, I never thought Daredevil would be so flabby. So overall, it's been a very entertaining issue.
It ends with, I must find an answer to the problem of Foggy. Daredevil thinks, at first I was touched by his pathetic attempts to impress Karen, but now he's gone too far. He's endangered himself and Karen, and he's made me look like the world's prized boob. And so then Foggy's patheticness will come to some sort of climax next issue, seemingly as if they're going to write him out of the book. But in fact, Foggy will continue being pathetic for many, many years to come. As I say in my notes, pretty good new villain, funny story, great art, so not a bad issue.
When Foggy is picking up his costume, and Potter gives this proposition about the fake fight, Foggy thinks to himself, what have I got to lose? It sounds completely foolproof. And we've talked before about how one of my favorite sayings is that the reason it's so hard to make things foolproof is that fools are so damn clever. So,
Yes.
indeed, Foggy is able to definitely be a fool despite everything else. Let's move on to the mighty Thor. Tell me a tale of thunder in the netherworld.
Thunder in the Netherworld. So we have one of these Thor covers I'm never crazy about where you've got two different worlds and with a line separating the top half and bottom half of the cover. This is done at least 3 times by Kirby, and I'm never a big fan of these covers, although I think the cover is actually well done, given that that's weird. But I like Thor. I like Hercules, who's being restrained by a bunch of gray goons, and we've got Pluto up above. So this is Thor number 130. We by Stan the Man Lee, Jack King Kirby, Vince the Prince Coletta, and Artie Pussycat Simek. So then,
Now, I've been declaring this the year of Soupy Sales. I could just as easily have declared it the year of the Pussycat.
yes.
Probably even more justifiably. It's just that Soupy Sales is so much stranger.
So then Thor finally got around to doing at the end of last issue what he should have done at the beginning of last issue, which is go ahead and fight for Hercules against Pluto. Thor gets sent down to the netherworld. We have a sort of highway in the sky and the netherworld, which will later be seen again when Stern and Buscema do Adventures. And they have a great 5-issue Greek gods storyline. We have Thor then. You were just saying online that this is disappointing. Thor meets Cerberus, the guardian of the netherworld. And it is not a 3-headed dog, which, as you pointed out, Kirby would have shown the hell out of. Instead, it is a troll-looking dude.
Kirby is great at drawing Asgardian trolls, and this, even though it is Olympian, looks like an Asgardian troll. But, we can see that anytime.
Yeah.
This is the only time we can see a 3-headed dog.
Yeah, no, I'm disappointed. But so then they have a big fight. Meanwhile, Jane is hanging out with Tan and Isle, and Tan is like, okay, I'm bored pretending to be human. I am an alien, and I am now really Tan and Isle. If you were leading the vanguard of an alien invasion and your roommate figures out who you are, you got to kill her. But Tan and Isle is too nice. And Tan and Isle, instead of killing you, I will hypnotize you into leaving as far from New York City as you could possibly go to the far end of the world. And that's what she does and sends Jane away. Meanwhile, we have Hercules. They're trying to put the netherworld helmet on Hercules, which he is not happy about at all.
Well, he's so unhappy about it that his face is melting.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like that panel of his extremely distressed face.
Well, I like it generally, but his right eye on our left, I mean, that is sliding off of his face.
Yeah, he's very upset.
And that's what happens when you're very upset. Your eye slides off the side of your face.
So the Thor is continuing to fight for Hercules. Lots of great art. Claudia doing unexpectedly okay job on Kirby. Certainly the top of page 9, amazing art. We then see that hypnotized Jane is being sent away by Tan and Isle, and Tan and Isle is like, finally, I can do my little dance that I haven't been able to do while I had this human roommate. And she starts doing a dance with Kirby Crackle and fantastic lights appearing around her. Thor continues to fight in the netherworld. Some really beautiful art, really fantastic battling going on until Pluto, there is no real climax to the battle. Pluto just says, okay, I can see you've beaten enough of my goons that you're eventually going to beat me, and I'm going to go ahead and declare this whole thing over. I'm going to tear up the contract, going to leave Hercules free to not be in the netherworld anymore, and Thor and Hercules walk off into the distance, glad that their bromance can continue. Next issue, The Strange Secret of Tan and Isle, we have spoken. So that was this issue. I think basically it's a big battle issue. Thor and Hercules battling Greek menaces, and it is awesome. This is a great issue. What did you think?
Yeah, generally I liked it. For the most part, I think that I am more disappointed with how Coletta handled this particular issue than you are. There were a number of places where it's just like, come on, man. I know you pointed out a particular panel that was indeed quite good, but I like the Thor and Hercules stuff. I think I like it better when they're a little bit more in conflict. It did feel a little bit odd to me that Hercules was in such abject fear. Well, let me put it this way, showed such abject fear as the crown was coming towards him. I like Hercules to be in action right?
Yeah.
Rather than a helpless bystander who is afraid of what's going to happen next. That seems kind of out of character. But overall, fantastic fight scenes and lots of fun.
Yeah, I think it's great. Let me check my notes, see if there's anything else. Yeah, I was just saying about the cover. So many things that I don't like about Vince Gilletto, but number one thing I dislike about Vince Gilletto, number one, with a bullet, far and above everything else I dislike about Vince Gilletto, elbows. I just think he does terrible elbows. And Thor's elbow on the cover, like this would be a perfectly okay cover if not for Thor's elbow. If you could just put a little sticker, put a little half-price sticker over Thor's elbow. Gilletto manages to get just as many lines into every elbow as he has on the rest of the page combined.
Again, I will say the number of lines is not the problem. John Severin certainly uses as many lines per page as Vince Gilletto does. He just employs them much more professionally.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and look at Tales of Asgard in the back. The two storylines sort of overlapped, but we are now deep into the Hurricane storyline where Thor and the Warriors 3, who are four buddies we know and love, as they would be in the MCU, are off fighting Hurricane in Muspelheim. And Kirby does a great job with Muspelheim and Hurricane's troops. We have great fighting of the Warriors 3, and of course that means great Volstagg dialogue, which I always love. Though my every limb aches to join thee, I must make the supreme sacrifice and turn my attention elsewhere, for another hath need of Volstagg's awesome might. Shouldst that need help, dashing Fandral, say but to thyself, what would mighty Volstagg do if he were sorely pressed? Now must I hasten to the side of the god of thunder. And I love Volstagg. He's maybe my favorite Marvel character, one of my favorite Marvel characters. Then we get to...
Meanwhile, Muspelheim, I was just thinking, wait, is that a real thing or is that something they made up? Muspelheim is the realm of fire out of the 9 worlds.
Yeah, it's where Surtur's from. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we get to a really dumb ending to the story, unfortunately, where Thor finally knocks out Hurricane, and then he's like, hey, this guy looks a lot like me, except for his hair is brown. That means I can imitate him. And it's like, because you carry around brown hair dye?
Well, it's like panel 1 on page 5 of this story. I'm thinking that's supposed to be what he's doing there. He has some sort of rag that he's holding up onto his hair. And I'm guessing that's supposed to be... Oh, yeah, there's a little bowl next to him and a fireplace right behind. I'm guessing he's taking, carbonized wood and brushing it into his hair? I don't know.
I never like very much storylines that involve one person impersonating another person, and this is an especially silly one, sort of disappointing level of plotting for Tales of Asgard, which usually has plots that aren't, well, I don't know. I was going to say plots that aren't quite this silly. Tales of Asgard has certainly gotten silly at times, but I find this, for some reason, I find Thor coloring his hair to pretend to be Hurricane beneath the dignity of Tales of Asgard. But other than that, it's a perfectly fine story. It's fantastic to get Thor and the Warriors 3 in a big fight, and Volstagg got a Volstagg.
Yeah, Volstagg got a Volstagg. That is as true now as it has ever been.
Yes.
So I am going to now astonish you with Tales to Astonish, number 81. And we have a cover without any dialogue. We see a guy with what looks like a whole bunch of polka dots on blousy sleeves, throwing little discs, and also there happens to seem to be a boomerang back there. Yes. But the boomerang does not seem to be his main weapon, despite the name we will find out for him when we get to that story.
Indeed, it is not. Should be called Flying Red Disc Man.
Or, the washer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you know what? If I were writing this, I'd rename him the Washer. But we are going to begin with Submariner, When a Monarch Goes Mad. Amazing story, Stan Lee. Astonishing art, Gene Colan. Astounding inks, Dick Ayers. Agonizing lettering, Sam Rosen. So Namor becomes aware that Lady Dorma has left him for Krang, not knowing that she is doing so under duress, and he just flips his lid. And he becomes a really despotic tyrant to his own people, including persecuting the family members of Dorma. right? So
Yes.
it's like, no, you're really. And he's like, dude, I'm one of your most loyal subjects. It's like, yeah, but you're Dorma's cousin, so off to the dungeons with you.
Now, keep in mind when Namor was restored to the throne a couple of years ago, they're like, finally, democracy has been restored to,
No,
to
no,
Atlantis.
that's not what they said, and that was my point at the time. They said we are free, and I was like, you're free? You seem to have an absolute monarch, like without even a parliament or anything like that. I don't see that as free. And I was actually just about to reference that very thing right now, in that this is what I was talking about.
Yeah.
You are not free as long as you have an unaccountable dictator, whether by family or by force. So on page 5, panel 1, I was noticing that that's one place where the Colin's penciling and Ayers' inking kind of seems to fall apart. Everything you complain about with, well, not everything, but most of the stuff you were just complaining about with Vince Colletta on Thor's elbow, I see here just with slightly thicker lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, we just see Namor in greater and greater mental and emotional distress and taking it out on his subjects and his surroundings as we go through. We do see on page 7 that apparently Atlantean technology is just bought from Radio Shack, just like human technology is in the 1960s. Third panel, page 7.
I remember at one point here in Evanston, my wife came home and she said, "Oh, did you hear there's a new coffee shop going in where the Radio Shack went out?" And I said, "But what if Radio Shack comes back?" And
Radio Shack was great. I think that we are, especially now that sort of like electronic hobbyist stuff is sort of a thing again, that, they could be selling Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and all sorts of stuff like that. And it's a shame they're not around anymore.
yes.
All right. Namor then sends out his forces to find Krang. Krang is saying to Lady Dorma, hey, I'm going to put this hood on your head and then give you some sort of treatment that's going to turn you into a white-looking lady who, rather than a blue person, you're instead going to look like somebody who came from Europe originally, and that means we'll also be able to temporarily breathe air, and off we go.
Because they are planning on hiding out on the surface world for a while.
And we end up seeing more of that in Tales of Suspense, which we will talk about in our next episode. And we just see Namor wreck a statue of Dorma and then head off to the surface to follow Krang and Dorma, where his forces have seen them going. And that's pretty much it. Not much happens in this issue. It's just...
No, very little happens.
It's like
I
Namor
looked at my notes, and there's basically nothing in my notes.
Right. It's basically, Namor turns bad. That's the that's the whole thing. We really could have handled, as they say, this could have been an email. So So let's move on to other things. Oh, did you have any other thoughts about that before we move on?
I say Namor becomes a petty tyrant. So much for restoring the will of the people. Not much to issue. Just Namor upset about ending of last issue. Looks pretty good. I said I like the art on this fine. I think Colin enjoys Namor's freak out. I think Colin is good at freakouts, and Colin is enjoying Namor's mad gyrations throughout the issue.
Yeah, the art's pretty good, but I am not liking the Ayers inks as much as I was liking the Everett inks that we were teased with for an issue there.
Yeah, I agree. I liked Everett better.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, it almost goes without saying. But I'm just saying, I think I found that more distracting for my enjoyment of the art in the issue than I think you did. So, The Incredible Hulk, the stage is set, introducing the man called Boomerang. So this must be a heavily Boomerang-themed villain that we're going to be seeing this issue. We'll see. We'll read the next little bit and find out. Hulkable script by Stan Lee, Hulksome layout by Jack Kirby, Hulkorious art by Bill Everett, Hulkated lettering by Sam Rosen, costumes by Tibor of Transylvania. And this is another issue that looks much more like an Everett issue than a Kirby issue, for the most part, although there are a pair of panels that I'm going to point out at one point later where it looks like this panel looks like Kirby, this panel looks like Everett. But, you're
Yeah.
going to have that from time to time. So what we're first seeing is some footage of Hulk wrecking havoc on the army equipment and things like that, with a little bit of narration explaining what's going on.
This is a bizarrely structured issue because last we saw the Hulk, he was involved in a huge war between the Mole Man and Tyrannus. And I don't know about you, but I'm like, great, Hulk in a war between Mole Man and Tyrannus. Can't wait to see more. And instead, we begin this issue with seemingly we're looking at Hulk fighting this giant missile being shot in by General Ross, which is a perfectly fine Hulk setup, but it's not what we were in the middle of. And then we realize this is just a film strip being watched by the Secret Empire, who we've never met before. And then we meet Boomerang for several pages, and then finally we get back to what is going on underground. I find it to be this is just a mixed up issue. It is not giving me what I want.
Fair enough. So, yes, so we meet the Secret Empire. As we have seen, we've just been introduced in the last several months ago to Hydra, and now we are kind of in the middle of being introduced to AIM/them, both of whom will go on to be very important secret evil organizations in the Marvel Universe. And now we're being introduced to the Secret Empire, who will also go on to be not quite as famous, but there will be a really infamous storyline about them in the 70s, where it turns out that they are being run by Richard Nixon out of the White House, who ends up killing himself when he's discovered, and the government just replaces him with a body double. So,
yes. And then an even more infamous storyline in the 2010s, where I think it was a Secret Empire storyline where Captain America revealed he had secretly been a Hydra agent for the entire history of the book, and said "Hail Hydra," and that caused, Fox News got involved and caused people to turn on the book and all sorts of things. So right. There have been no shortage of controversial Secret Empire storylines over the years.
Yes, and do you think the name Secret Empire is supposed to be some sort of a reference to the so-called Invisible Empire of the KKK?
I don't know. Could be.
Because
they are wearing hoods.
They are wearing, well, I mean, who isn't wearing hoods in these secret societies? Yeah, then we cut to this dude in a tuxedo hanging out in a nice-looking apartment while a glamorous-looking woman with black hair is looking through his photo album of him as a professional baseball player, and he was suspended for some reason. Meanwhile, he's getting a phone call, and he's like, "Talk fast, keep it low. You have 30 seconds. And then, oh yeah, I don't miss being a baseball player. Yeah, Ryan Missile, understand. I'll do it. No negotiation for price or anything like that. So we know that he's got something going up. He then breaks his date with this beautiful woman, and she seems a little upset, but not that upset. We then see his 60s TV and hi-fi console slide up out of the way to find his secret closet with his boomerang outfit, which, of course, yeah, there is a boomerang there if you know what you're looking for, but it looks just like a belt at this point. And we're like, oh, okay, so man in a tuxedo is going to be the boomerang, ex-baseball pitcher. All right, sure, why not? So now we finally get to what you were missing from earlier. We are back in the middle of the underground war. Tyrannus versus Mole Man. Each of them has their own army of underground, pale yellow, bug-eyed goons. One of them is called the Tyrannoids, the other group of which is called the Moloids. It is unclear about whether these are just two different nationalities of pale yellow, bug-eyed goons, or whether they are two separate species, but one way or the other, they are fighting each other under their assorted leaders. So Bruce Banner, who is now Bruce Banner again, his glasses have now disappeared. Right? Remember I was talking about how his glasses mysteriously appeared on his face. They are not here anymore. Last panel on page 4. This is one of those places where I think that Bill Everett's fine lines kind of got lost in the reproduction because it's a little hard. It looks like Bruce Banner is, giving a side eye to his right, but it's not entirely clear. It also looks like he could have white eyes that are looking straight ahead or something else. Yeah. It's kind of nebulous, and actually something about that panel reminds me of Bob Burden.
The creator of Flying Carrot comics. Yes.
Yes, Flaming Carrot.
I'm sorry. Flaming carrot.
Flaming carrot, Matt. I mean, how can you get the legendary Atlanta comic creator's greatest creation wrong?
Sorry.
Anyway, yeah, something about his eyes reminding me of Bob Burden's art. Bruce Banner captures Tyrannus, who is currently an old man. He ends up making Tyrannus drop his bust of when he was a young, virile, godlike man.
I love that Tyrannus is wandering through his underworld former kingdom looking like an old shriveled man, and he's just carrying around in one hand, he's got a gun in one hand, and in the other hand he's carrying the bust of how handsome he used to be. And I'm like, I am a 48-year-old man, I can identify with this. I have thought about just carrying around a bust of what I used to look like in one hand at all times, going like, look at my magnificent head of hair I had when I was 20 years old, look at it, everyone. But
yeah,
I've never done that.
I was never particularly confident in my own looks. I didn't think I was ugly, but I was like, whatever. I'm okay. I'm average. But then a few years ago, somebody on a North Fulton High School alumni page posted a page from my senior or junior yearbook about the winners of the so-called Ugly Man contest. And, I was like, okay, I don't know what this is, but sure. Okay, I'm one of the 4 people who won the Ugly Man contest. And then they took the picture and I was like making this weird sneering face, because, hey, it's the Ugly Man contest. But I then was looking at the other 3 people in there and I was like, oh, dear God, this was an honor. Somebody actually thought I was handsome. Like, what the? And I didn't take it seriously. What's wrong with me? Yeah. I get so. Now I would like to be able to go back and be like, look at what I used to look like. Why didn't I realize I looked like that and took advantage of it?
Yeah, I've often been told if you ever start feeling bad about your looks, just reassure yourself that in 20 years you're going to look back on this and you're going to be amazed at how handsome you were.
So after Banner runs off, Tyrannus notices that the ground is wet where he fell down, and he realizes that means he must be near the Fountain of Youth that he has been trying to reclaim. And so that seems to lead us to believe that they are going to be bringing Tyrannus back. So the hostages that they had are all... do we know how or why they were just transported back to the surface?
There is no reason. This is there's a lot of things I don't like about this issue, but Bruce Banner is like, I want to free the prisoners. And Tyrannus is like, I know nothing about prisoners. There was one surface prisoner. I took the Greenskin Hulk. And then Bruce Banner is like, no, don't you remember? You took all these other prisoners. And he's like, oh, they were of no use to me. So I returned them to the surface. How, man? How did they get back? By my matter transmitter, of course. So I think this is just really lame to kidnap all these people from the surface and then return them without any effort of our hero, just returning them back up there for no reason, even though our hero had not really done anything to save them yet. I think this is just poor plotting. And this whole Tyrannus Mole Man story was quite good and really comes to a very anticlimactic, disappointing thing where suddenly we're already supposed to care more about Boomerang than we ever cared about Tyrannus and Mole Man.
Which we do not.
Which we do not. I think that this is... very lame plotting in this issue.
Yes. So when Talbot, Betty Ross, and Rick, Betty Ross, Betsy Ross? I always get mixed up. Which one is the woman who... Betty.
Betsy Ross, so the first flag. This is Betty Ross.
Okay, but I can never remember which is which. So Betty Ross, Glenn Talbot, and Rick Jones, when they reappear on the surface, are very quickly discovered by a jeep full of troops. They are now picked up and rescued. So we now see Boomerang in his full outfit, which is just not good. It's like a white blouse with kind of a harness and a belt, both of which are red, and what look like polka dots all over his sleeves, which are apparently these little washers that he flings at things with his baseball pitching ability, brown pants and some red boots, and a silly-looking helmet, which might have looked better in the hands of Kirby. I don't know.
This is basically the shirt from Seinfeld.
Well, here's one thing I was thinking about, is that the blousy sleeves and the repeating pattern reminds me of Captain Boomerang from DC Comics.
Yeah, I guess he did have blousy sleeves, didn't he?
Yeah, and boomerang pattern all over the whole thing. Yeah, no, this this looks to me like, it's like, come on, you can't even rip off a good looking outfit. Anyway, so this guy is able to throw these discs with such accuracy and force that he's able to actually shatter the steering column of an army jeep that's driving by, causing them to have to stop the jeep. And the soldiers get out with their guns and they're charging this guy. And he says, "Come now, soldier, you wouldn't shoot a man in cold blood who is merely holding a small metal disc, would you?" And the soldier's thinking, he's right. How can I shoot a man simply because he broke our steering wheel? And I'm like, I'm not sure I buy that. Anyway, so then he, of course, then uses it to destroy their guns and looks like shatter their kneecaps. He uses it to, knock rocks out of the hands of Talbot and Rick Jones in a way that looks like, once again, he has definitely just shattered their elbows. But, what are you going to do? Now, we finally, at this point, see Boomerang pull out a boomerang. And, oh, that belt that looked vaguely boomerang-like is apparently his boomerang. And, granted it is powerful. It's able to basically knock down a small mountain.
He should be called Washerman. He should be called Big Thick Red Washerman, because he is mostly using big thick red washers to do his evil work. And, of course, he can fly. I feel like Stan Lee has been giving in to his baser instincts a little bit more in terms of having people fly who really there is no reason why they should be able to fly. And even when we were kids, Boomerang later would get a much more boomerang, would give up on the thick red metal washers and would get a more boomerang themed outfit, but he would always be able to fly. And I never bought it as a kid. Like, this guy doesn't even have like a jetpack. He should not be able to fly. And generally speaking, boomerang themed villains shouldn't be able to fly. But anyway.
Well, I mean, they should be able to fly, but they'd have to land back at the exact same spot they took off from.
Exactly. Fly in huge arcs.
So you were saying thick red washerman on page 6, when he takes his first washer off his sleeve, it has a sound effect, thick. So, you were indeed right. At the bottom of page 9, last two panels, these are the panels I was talking about where side by side we've got definitely Kirby and then we've got definitely Everett.
Yeah, I guess.
Which just really jumped out at me in that case. So Hulk, that's right. So Hulk never returned back to the surface. He's just been down here the whole time. So he ends up coming back up into the battle. He is being grappled by some of the pale yellow goons. He turns back into the Hulk, knocks over a Tyrannus statue, and then goes into some lab, and I guess he's being beamed to the surface, I think. Yeah.
He finds the teleportation device. That's what he's been looking for this whole time, is the device that teleported Hulk to the surface. Now, it seems like, if you're underground, you should just be able to battle your way to the surface. But it's more like they're on another planet here in terms of the only way to get back to the surface is through this teleportation device.
Well, as we've talked about with Stan Lee comics, underwater, underground, other time periods, those are all indistinguishable from other planet.
Yes.
That's just the way he does it. So yeah, no, it's at least consistent. I've bought into it at this point.
Yes. Yeah. Let me see if there's anything else I had to say. I get the feeling that Stan Lee regrets getting rid of Hydra so quickly. Like, he invented Hydra and then he decided to turn it into this massive storyline, which brought ended in the big climactic crushing of Hydra, and then he was like, I miss Hydra. They were awesome. Let me go ahead and keep doing half-ass Hydras for a while and have AIM and have Secret Empire and have them and have these various things. And then finally, he, in about 6 or 7 issues or so, he's going to say, like, let's just bring Hydra back. And then they will go on to be the main evil secret society in Marvel history. But for now, we're still doing low-rent knockoffs.
One last thing I had in my notes was when the Secret Society is then going to call Boomerang, they've got a little device that looks like a rotary phone. Actually, yeah, it's a rotary phone dial on a handheld corded remote with a little microphone on it and a Boomerang B logo on it. And as he's dialing the rotary dial here, it says clickety-clack, So, I'm like, all right, clickety clack. That's the noise the choo-choo makes. I hadn't noticed until this very moment how it is literally exactly a telephone dial, complete with the little finger stopper thing. Just use a phone.
Predicting our modern era in terms of having the initials of somebody come up on the phone when you dial their number.
There you go.
That happens in our modern day. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up there. That was the first half of the books in July 1966. We think we're going to have a guest for our next episode, or maybe it'll be a special episode. We still haven't figured it out yet. We've got various people who we are trying to get in contact with. But this episode is in the can. Any last thoughts on the first half of July 1966?
It's once again, as always, a bit of a mixed bag. Interesting goodbye to Spider-Man, even if anticlimactic. That's almost kind of appropriate in some ways. Great art in Daredevil with some silly plots. Thor, lots of action adventure, although I'd like to have seen more of Hercules. And Tales to Astonish, an utterly useless, although pretty Namor story, and a rather confused and discombobulated but action-packed Hulk story. So, it's good and bad.
Yep. Okay, half of a month. We have an absolutely amazing book to discuss next. So, all right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Goodbye, everybody. We will see you next time.
Yes, thank you everybody for tuning in. As always, please rate and review us on your favorite podcatcher. And we will see what we talk about next episode. It might be a special episode. It might be a regular episode. It is a mystery, and you will find out at the same time we do.
Yes. Should we go ahead and point out that we haven't gotten a new iTunes review in about a year? And it is, I realize that they don't make it easy to do. Like, whenever I tell people on my blog, like, please review my stuff, I always have to go like, okay, it's very hard to review things on iTunes. You have to sort of jump through hoops. There's not like, click this link to review us on iTunes. But make the effort, people. Come on, man. It's been a year.
I go back and forth on that because I don't want to feel too thirsty. People might be like, oh god, these guys are desperate. But yeah, one way or the other, it is always heartening to get at least a rating. At least give us a 5-star rating. We haven't had one of those in a while either. All right, but one way or the other, thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye, and stay safe out there.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to MarvelRereadClub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.